All right, we're going to start with a few little things to think about. So let's talk about religion, all right? So on the act of thinking, this is what each denomination means, all right? So this is what their thought process is. A Protestant, it's the thought that counts, all right? So that's true. Taoism, you are what you think, all right? So this is some of the ideas, mindsets behind different religions. Catholicism, stop thinking those thoughts, all right? You just can't think it. Judaism, you should have thought of that before, yeah, all right? Atheism, it's not a thought, it's an idea. That's very true. TV evangelism, don't think, have faith. Buddhism, think a God thought. Think a God thought. I don't know what that means, but all right. Zen Buddhism, it's not the thinking that counts. And then Hinduism, I've had that thought before. All right, so some things to contemplate and think about as we go through the lesson this morning. So I don't know about you, but I have random thoughts when I'm going through the Bible, and my thoughts usually wander into things that I'm really not even listening to. I don't know how many others are like that. But recently I was going through the book of Judges in my Bible reading, and something stood out to me that I've never thought of before. What does a judge mean in the Bible? Usually when you think of a judge, it's somebody that is going to say if you're going to have a sentence or you're not going to have a sentence. That's the only thing there is, right? Well, in the Bible, it's a little different. So judges don't just mean sentencing or judgment. They also are a lot of other things. They are leaders. They are usually some form of military. They were, in that time, a lot of times, the people that everybody went to for everything, not just go to them for judgment. So a lot of the judges that we learn about, so Gideon's one of them, he's a big one. A lot of the judges, they literally saved Israel. All right? So this lesson, now, hang with me. This is a kid's lesson, all right? But hang with me because there's a lot of good truths in this. If you would, turn your Bibles to Judges chapter 1. We're going to start in the beginning. And this is going to be a brief overview because there's no way I could get through, well, I have 26 pages here, so we can't get through it. But we can talk about a little. So Judges chapter 1. All right, verse 1. Now after the death of Joshua, so there's the big first thing, the death of Joshua. That's a big part of the start of the Judges book. It came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall go up for us against the Canaanites first to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah. So the tribe of Judah should go up first, all right? Shall go up. Behold, I have delivered the land into his hand. And Judah said unto Simeon, his brother, come up with me into my lot, that we might fight against the Canaanites, and I likewise will go up with thee into thy lot. So Simeon went with him, and Judah went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hands. And they slew of them Bezek 10,000 men, and they found Adon-Bezek in Bezek, and they fought against him, and they slew the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And Adoni-Bezek fled, and they pursued after him, and caught him, and cut off his thumbs and his great toes. And Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings have their thumbs and their great toes cut off, gathered their meat under my table. As I have done, so God hath requited me. So in other words, he's done the same thing to me as I did to them. All right? As I have done, so God hath requited me. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and there he died. Now the children of Judah had fought against Jerusalem, and had taken it, and smitten it with the edge of the sword, and set the city on fire. All right, verse 9. And afterward the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites, and dwelt in the mountain, and in the south, and in the valley. All right, so the book of Judges, and really the entire book, is a very, the easiest way to say it is a barbaric time of history. And a little side thought, so I've questioned. I was like, well, why? Everybody says, why would a loving God, let somebody die, right? Well, I had a question. Why would a loving God be the cause of all this destruction? Why would a loving God be the one that makes and has the Israelites slaughter all these people? Right? This is a side thought. And then God spoke to me about that and said, well, listen, at that time, it was all about justice. There was no grace. God's mercy is with Jesus, right? At the time of the judges, there was not grace. There was only judgment. So, being a perfect God, all those people are not following God. They're not doing things that God would want. They were judged. They didn't have God. So, anyway, that was a little side note. But in my thoughts, it's like, well, judges all these harsh, barbaric things are because they didn't have grace at that time. And praise the Lord for our season of grace, right? We don't have to worry about being judged without grace, which is wonderful. All right, so let's go into the lesson. So let's do a little Bible background. The title of the book of Judges may be slightly misleading. While it is true that the largest section of the book, Judges 3:7 through 16:3, records God sending judges or deliverers to lead the rescue of Israel. And that's the one thing that stands out so much to me is God sent the judges not to necessarily judge Israel, but to rescue Israel. And in my thought process, it's like, who would we consider judges today? I think pastors would be the judges, right? They're the ones that are taking the word of God to everybody, trying to show them where they need to go and how they need to go to Christ, how they need to accept salvation. So anyway, that's another side note. But the judges, they were there to rescue, not to just judge. God's judgment, it records a dark time in Israel history, a time when people turned from God's plan for them to be a holy nation and instead became like the Canaanites. So, how many times do we know of Israel's history that they stray from God, significantly stray from God, and then there's a rude awakening, really. You need to turn back or else. And sometimes God would warn and say, hey, listen, you need to turn back or there's going to be judgment. And when there was judgment, it was pretty severe. Anyway, in this, talking about the judges, we're also going to learn that the judges, they not only would do judgment, they would also rescue Israel, but they were also great military leaders. So they were not just these people that were in these positions to look pretty. A lot of times I know some judges and they don't seem to be very, outside of the judging field, they don't seem to be very knowledgeable of anything else other than that. But in this, the judges, they knew a lot of stuff. These were the leaders of Israel. So this is prior to the time of all the great kings. So like King David and King Saul, which is at the end of Judges. All these are the men that come later on. And this is before that. All right, so the book of Joshua ends with Joshua reminding the Israelites of God's promise to drive the Canaanites from the land. In Joshua 24, Joshua called on the people to commit to obey and to serve the Lord. The people swore, the Lord, our God, we will serve, and His voice we will obey. All right, you can turn to Joshua 24, verse 24, where it says, And the people said unto Joshua, The Lord our God will we serve, and His voice will we obey. How many times in my Christian life have I said, God, I'm going to do everything you say. I'm just going to do it now. And then 5 minutes later, I do the absolute opposite. That's Israel all through the Bible. So there's a couple takeaways from that. So we as Christians know that we can't be perfect, right? I never planned on being perfect. I don't want to try to be perfect because I mess up wherever I go. The Israelites are perfect examples of what our Christianity looks like. We've got the times where we're doing well. We have the times where we're doing okay, and then we have the times where we're just not doing it all. Me as a Christian and falling away from God on a regular basis brings me back to judgment. So when God judges my life, it's not because He wants to, it's because He's perfect, and He has to. He brings me back to where I should be. And that's the story of Israel in here. So the judges were the bringing Israel back to where they should be. And when you have that, it's just not fun. Turn back on over to Judges 1 again. We're gonna primarily be in Judges 1 and through chapter 3. Judges 1:1 continues the history of Israel after Joshua's death. Now, Joshua's death was the big start of all this Judges. Of course, that's right before the book of Judges. Joshua was the leader that they all looked to, and he took them into a lot of different areas that God wanted them to. He was their leader. Well, then after his death, they're kind of scattered. So they don't have a direction. They don't know what they need to do. They need somebody to lead. So God's going to set up the judges to help in that. Judges begins with Joshua's death. It begins hopefully with the Israelites tribe asking the Lord which tribe should attack the Canaanites. So they're asking God what they need to do. They just don't have a leader at this time. So what should they do? They asked the Lord what they should do, who should come and fight the Canaanites. The Lord's answer was Judah should be the first to go, and He had delivered the land into their hands. Judges 1 verse 2. And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have delivered the land into his hand. So every time you read anything in the Bible, whenever God is leading, it always works out perfectly, right? So it always works out as planned, as said. So when Israel decides to follow God, it always works out. And we know that. It's in the history. When we as Christians decide to follow God, it may not look like we want, but it always works out. It may not work out like we want, but it works out like He wants. So in this story, where they're going through and they're fighting all these different lands, this is to regain what they had lost. All right? So Israel's regaining the lands that they had lost. They're coming back to the places where they knew, where they wanted to be, where God told them they should be. So the fighting is not just to say, hey, I don't like them, we're going to go take them out. That's not what it was about. It was about to returning where they came from, returning the lands that were taken from them, and taking it back. And God had promised them this land. So these were not just places that they wanted. This was places God promised them. So even though we're reading about a lot of hard things in here, and we'll get down to the guy who lost his thumbs and his toes in a minute, we have to remember that this is not just about God being harsh. That's not what it's about. It's about God restoring what's supposed to be. And in my Christian life, when God restores to me where He wants me to be, it's so much better than where I decide I want to go. I think that I like where I'm at, but then when God shows me where I should be, it's so much better. It just is. So Judges 1:1 continues the history of Israel with Joshua's death. Judges 1 verse 2 shows God's pleasure with Israel's willingness to obey. Israel appears eager to obey God in conquering the rest of the Canaanites. So they're doing well for a short period of time. They're not focusing on something that's outside of what God wants. They're asking God, they're trusting God. And that's really how Judges begins, but that is not how Judges continues. So here in a few minutes, we're going to learn that the time of Judges, the Israelites, they fell away. So they had to have somebody come together to point them in the right direction, to rescue them. All right, let's go on to Judges 1 verses 3. Judges 1 verse 3. It says, And Judah said unto Simeon, his brother, Come up with me into my lot, that we may fight against the Canaanites. And I likewise will go with thee into thy lot. So Simeon went with him. All right, let's skip on down to verse 26 for a minute. Let's skip down. It says, and the man went into the land of the Hittites and built a city and called the name thereof Luz, which is the name thereof unto this day. Verse 27. Neither did Manasseh drive out the inhabitants of Bethshan and her towns, nor Tanakh and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Dor and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Libleam, and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Megiddo and her towns, but the Canaanites would dwell in the land. All right, so they're still in the midst of the Canaanites inhabiting these areas. So there's a whole big point of they took this one area, they took this king, they're going to take more stuff, but there's still Canaanites in the land. So they drive out some of them. This is where we are at in the story. They drive out some of them, but they haven't drove out all of them. And here in a minute, we're going to learn why they are still in the land and why this is a problem. So skipping back to the king that was captured, the king Adonai-Bezek, the one who lost his thumbs and his toes. Very harsh punishment. And then it says he died in Jerusalem, which I'm sure it wasn't a natural death. He was probably put to death in Jerusalem. But that king was not supposed to have returned to Jerusalem. So that king was supposed to have been judged, and he would have already been killed where he stood. But the Israelites decided to take him back and make a show of him. And that's not what God wanted. All right, so let's go back and read verses 5, and then we'll skip down to verses 26, 27 again. Verses 5, 6, and 7 on through the end of 9. It says, and they found Adonai-Bezek in Bezek, and they fought against him, and they slew the Canaanites and the Perizzites. But Adonai-Bezek fled, and they pursued after him, and caught him, and cut off his thumbs and his great toes. And Adonai-Bezek said, 70 kings have their thumbs and their great toes cut off, gathered their meat under my table. So in other words, they did this to all those kings. It wasn't just him. As I have done, so God hath requited me. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and there he died. So when they brought him to Jerusalem, it wasn't just to bring him there. It was there to make sport. Look what we did. Look how we did it. God was not about that. God's not about to show off what's happening. So that's Israel's first mistake right there. They were showing off. Now the children of Israel, verse 8, of Judah, and had fought against Jerusalem and had taken it and smitten it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. And afterward the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites that dwelt in the mountain and in the south and in the valley. All right, so not only did they make a mock of the kings, but now Jerusalem was set on fire. So the Canaanites, they rebelled. They're like, all right, well, you're going to do this to us. We're going to go set your city on fire. So they destroyed Jerusalem. So now we're back to fighting again. We're back in the Canaanites. So Israelites' first mistake, they were being haughty. They were being very proud of what they had accomplished. Well, right after that, God let them set their city on fire. Then we're back to fighting again. This is a story over and over in Judges, is they make a little improvement, and then they fight. And then they make improvement, and then they do something dumb, and they fight. It's just back and forth. And it sounds a lot like my Christian life. Is I make a little improvement, then I fight God or do something dumb, and then I'm back to fighting for my life again, right? Back to fighting for fellowship with God, back to trying to get back where I'm supposed to be. Israel's failure to remove the Canaanites. That's what we're looking at here in chapter 1 of Judges. The failure wasn't God's failure. It was a failure on the Canaanites' part for not trusting God and not doing exactly what he said. All right, let's go on and move down. Judges 1 verse 7. Canaanite king, although he was wicked, he deserved punishment, but Judah disobeyed God's command to destroy all the inhabitants of the land. Judah also was unable to drive out the inhabitants of the lowland. Judges 1 verse 19. All right, let's skip down to verse 19. And the Lord was with Judah, and he drave out the inhabitants of the mountains, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron. Now, why are chariots of iron in the Bible so significant? I know I've read about it many times. I know that Rome, they had chariots of iron. You know, they had brass and iron. And but why were these so significant in this time? And I thought about this a little bit too. This is another side note. Because when you're fighting on the ground, which if you have horses, that's great. But when you're fighting on the ground just against somebody and they have something that's iron, you're not going to do much against that. So they're running over them is what they're doing. This is a very harsh, bloody battle, and it's just barbaric. But in this time, they couldn't fight against this. It was like tanks. It's like people shooting at a tank nowadays with a regular gun. You're not going to make a lot of improvements in that war. You're just not. So God is going to have to intervene again here in a minute, because right now they're not able to do this. All right, let's go ahead and move on down. Although God had promised Israel certain victory, similarly, the tribe of Benjamin failed to drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem. Let's read down in verse 21 again. It says, "And the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem unto this day." All right, they never did drive them out. They just finally said, okay, well, we're just going to let you stay. We're just going to come together with you. Another second thing against God, he told them to destroy them. He didn't tell them to be okay with them. Second one here, second disobedient, was right here. Benjamin did not drive out Jebusites. They just kind of lived with them. All right, if you're going to just stay there, we'll just let you be. When we look at the book of Judges, this is where the judges are coming, and the judges are coming. This is where the judges come into play. Because all these things that Israel's doing, the judges are going to come in here in a little bit and say, hey, listen, you are wrong. God told you to do it this way, and you did it X, Y, and Z, which we are reading right now. So this is the preparedness for the judges. All right? Israel is not following God as they're supposed to be. All right, let's go ahead and continue. Contrary to God's command, Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 5. Let's turn to Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 5. This is contrary to God's command. This is God's command. It says, "And when the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them." Oh, what was that right there? They didn't do that. All right. "Thou shalt make no covenant with them." Oh, there's a second one. Hey, wait, they just decided to just keep and stay with the other ones. Oh, well, there's a second one. "Nor show mercy unto them." Oh, well, they showed a little mercy unto them. They brought that king back too, right, to make sport of him. "Neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughters thou shalt not give unto his sons, nor his daughters shalt thou take unto thy sons. For they will turn away thy sons from following me, that they may serve other gods." Look at the problem there. Why was God wanting them to do this? Because the other group was not going to ever serve God. And all they were going to do was turn the Israelites away from God. So when God tells you something, He doesn't do it just to say it, right? He does it because there's a reason. All right, let's keep reading. "Turn away thy sons from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy thee suddenly." Oh, there it is. There's the judgment. What happens when we don't do what God says? He doesn't just say, oh, okay, well, that's all right. It'll be fine. There's a judgment. All right. Here in a few minutes, that's where these judges come in. So they not only judge Israel in a way to say you're doing wrong, they do save them, they do help them, and they do lead them. but they point out their faults. I don't like when people point out my faults, right? And when we come to church, that's why I said I believe that a pastor is in the position of a judge. He points out our faults. Now, it's not him doing it, but it's God doing it, which it was the same way with the judges, but pointing out faults. They do not like that. So I'm sure they really loved it when the judges came and pointed out what they were doing wrong. Verse 5, we'll continue on. But thus shall ye deal with them. Ye shall destroy their altars, and break down their images, and cut down their groves, and burn their graven images with fire. Not only are they supposed to destroy the people, they're supposed to destroy everything that those people have. So everything that was a possession was supposed to be destroyed. And we see this many times. When Israel was conquering other lands, they would take spoils of war, and God said not to do that. It's through the Bible quite a lot. We'll not get into that. But they weren't just supposed to make sure all the inhabitants were gone. They were supposed to burn that place down. God is preeminently first above everything. When God says it and we don't obey it, He's going to have consequences for it. It's just going to happen. All right, let's keep going. All right, so contrary to God's command, Deuteronomy 7, verses 1 through 5, the tribe of Joseph offered to let a man live if he would betray his city. Despite these early indications of disobedience, the southern tribes were mostly obedient in following God's command and destroy the Canaanites. They did most of what was right. My Christian life, I do most of what's right. It's just those little itsy-bitsy pieces that I miss that are the big problems. All right. In sharp contrast, Judges 1:27 begins. All right. Let's read verses 27. It said, Neither did Manasseh drive out the inhabitants of Bethshan and her towns, nor Tanakh and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Dor and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Iblim and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Megiddo and her towns, but the Canaanites would dwell in the land. Oh, there's our problem. They did not complete God's command in Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 5. He said to drive them out and destroy them. All right, I promise we're getting ready to get into some judges, all right? Let's skip down to God's warning. Let's go to Judges 2, 1 through 5. God's warning. What was the warning to God's people? So we know that they didn't listen. They left people. And now there's a warning. So Judges 2, 1 through 5. And an angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal. Well, that's bad. There's an angel of the Lord that apparently they're going to hear from. You don't want to hear from angels of the Lord, on average. Gilgal to Bochim, and said, I made you to go up out of Egypt, and have brought you unto the land which I swore unto your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And ye shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. Ye shall throw down their altars, but ye have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as thorns in your sides, and their God shall be snares unto you. And it came to pass, when the angel of the Lord spake these words unto all the children of Israel, that the people lifted up their voice and wept. And they called the name of that place Bochim, and they sacrificed there unto the Lord. Oh, here's your awakening, right? You didn't listen. So now there's a consequence. Now, instead of doing what I said I'm going to do, it's going to be the opposite. They're going to be thorns in your side. They're going to be a problem to you the rest of your life. And it's still to this day. There's still problems that they have to this day. It's never ended. But this is not something that is just going away. The warning was, I told you to do something you didn't. So now the consequence. Although the first chapter of Judges gives the Lord credit for Israel's success, Judges 1 verses 4 and 19, it is neutral in its presentation of the conquest. The chapter refrains from offering a spiritual evaluation of Israel's failure to drive out the Canaanites. See, it's not just that they just didn't do it. It's recognized as a spiritual failure. It's recognized as not following God. My Christian life is always going to be a lot better off if I follow God to the T. And we know that we know the blueprint is Israel. We should follow the examples of what they do most of the time, but there's also an example of showing us what our Christian life resembles. We're exactly like this. We're no different. And I promise, God will judge if you don't listen. Chapter 2 begins when the angel of the Lord comes to Israel to warn and rebuke them for their disobedience. The Lord reminds Israel of his past goodness in rescuing them. Remember the times? This is the story, right? Remember what I did for you? Remember how I made sure everything was smooth sailing for you when you fought those battles? Well, that's not going to happen anymore. It's just not. So God's saying, you let me down, now this is what you get. I don't like to let God down, but I do a lot. All right, let's continue on. All right, Judges 2:1. He also reminds Israel of their responsibilities not to make treaties with the Canaanites. So not only did they not drive them out, they also cozied up to them. Hey, let's become friends. Let's go trade. Let's, live in the same towns together. That was not what God wanted. And why was it? Why did God say in Deuteronomy 7 verses 1 through 5 that he didn't want them to do that? Because they would eventually lead them away from God. They were going to follow other gods. And we see this very evidently in the conflict between Israel and other countries over in the Middle East right now. Is they all serve these other false gods. Israel still serves the true God for the most part. They still serve God though. They may not serve God and have salvation right now because they don't believe in that, but they're still serving God. So God's country, God's nation is still Israel. And these other countries are still trying to drive them away from God. Hey, listen, if you'll just believe in Allah, come follow us, we won't touch you. You'll be fine. If you bow down to our God, you'll be fine. And this is the same thing right here. Is the reason there's a conflict is because it's like oil and water. They don't mix. It can't mix. So the reminder is, I told you to destroy them a long time ago, and now look what you're doing. Israel's choice to disobey God ultimately would lead to their devastation and exile. So not only will they be away from their promised land, they're going to start wandering in the wilderness. All right, so they're going to go opposite of God. They're going to go into a place that was not promised to them, a place with hardship, where they're never going to have any form of settlement. It's always going to be moving. I don't know about you. I don't like things that are just turmoil all the time. If I'm always having to pick up and move and pick up and move, it's not going to be a very happy life. I don't think I would be satisfied like that. But that's what Israel is going to have. All right, let's move on. So we had God's rebuke and warning, Judges 2:1 through 5. Now we have Israel's apostasy and God's response, Judges 2:6 through 3:6. I'm not going to read all of that, but we can start in 2:6. So this is the apostasy and God's response. All right, 2 verse 6. It says, "And when Joshua had let the people go, the children of Israel went every man to his inheritance to possess the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord that he did for Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old, and they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the mount of Ephraim, on the north side of the hill Gash." All right, verse 10. "And the Lord raises up judges," is a little headline. All right, so this is where your judges come in. It says, "And also all the generation were gathered into their fathers, and there arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel." So the time of Joshua, they had all the people that remembered. They had these experiences of being with God. But now you've got these young ones that are growing up that they've not been teaching about God. They've not been listening if they had. So they don't have God. They don't know God anymore. And what happens when a nation strays from God? They get judged, right? So the nation of Israel is now at the point that they don't remember God. So not only did they make mistakes, but now they're away from God. Verse 11, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served Balaam. Oh, look, they turned away to other gods. What did God say in Deuteronomy 7:1-5? It's playing out exactly like he said. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods of the people that were round about them. There are those people they did not destroy. So, not only did God tell them what was going to happen, but what God told them was going to happen did happen. All right? It's almost like a playbook, right? God tells you something, you don't do it, it happens exactly like he says. It's not like what I say. I could say, whatever. Oh, yeah, we're going to, all have golden houses and, golden cars and everything else in the next year. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. But when God says it, it happens. All right? Let's go ahead and keep reading. Other gods of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. And they forsook the Lord and served Baal and Ashtaroth. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of the spoilers that spoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies round about, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. What a judgment, right? Not only did they wander, not only were they out of the area they're supposed to be promised, they also got sold into captivity, all because they didn't listen. I think it's a lot easier to listen. So Israel's apostasy, Judges 2:2-5, the author reviews Israel's failure to conquer the land and God's warning in Judges 2 verse 6. We read that. The author continues to explain how Israel came to be dominated by the Canaanites in establishing a larger pattern of disobedience. The author loops back to the dismissal of the tribes after Joshua's speech in Joshua 24. Judges 2:6-10 repeats much of the information from Joshua 24:28-31. And I would challenge you to go back and read that. Those passages literally spell out exactly what happened here. And it's amazing how the Bible the past will equal exactly what happens in the future. Although the people obeyed God while Joshua and the rest of the elders of his generation were alive, verse 10 reveals the disturbing problem that resulted in Israel's future failure. Another generation arose after them that did not know the Lord. The Israelites' failure to know God resulted in their apostasy. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they served Baal. We just read that. Judges 11-13 reveals how Israel abandoned God and followed other gods. I'm just telling you, it's amazing to know that God's judgment is sure. So if you can rest on two things, God will always tell the truth, right? When God says it, he will deliver it. Those are the two truths we can rely on. When God says he wants you to do something, and this is where me as a Christian comes in, is when God gives me a thought and a desire that I feel like I need to do, it's my job to follow through with that. So when God speaks to you, all right, when he gives you a thought to do something, right? So, I need to go be a Sunday school teacher. Follow through with that. That's something God wants you to do. It's not just a voice in your head. I promise Satan's not going to say, hey, you should be a Sunday school teacher. He's just not going to do that. But God, when he whispers in that still small voice, follow through with it. Do what he says, even if you're scared. I promise, the Israelites, they're fighting wars. I'm sure they're probably pretty scared a lot of times. Oh yeah, God's on my side. I don't see him. I know he's on my side, but I don't see him. And I'm going to battle, but I don't see him, right? In my Christian life, that's what I have to do is I have to trust God. So if you have a time in your life when God calls you to do something, do it. It's not bad, it's good. The flip side could be a lot worse than you could ever imagine. Okay, yeah, maybe you'll be all right. Maybe you won't, be sold into bondage. Probably not. But there could be a lot of things that you miss. There could be a lot of times in your life that go by that could have been the best time of your life. Israelites' failure to know God resulted in their apostasy. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of God. Judges 2:11 through 13 reveals how Israel abandoned God and followed other gods. Since the Exodus, Israel had flirted with idolatry, and now they completely rejected God for pagan monstrosities. So they completely turned away from God. Israel's rejection of God infuriated him. The anger of God was hot against Israel. Judges 2 verses 14. All right, let's close with Judges 2 verse 14. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of the spoilers that spoiled them. And he sold them the hands of their enemies round about, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. Let's go ahead and read verse 15. Whithersoever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn unto them, and they were greatly distressed. So we'll stop right there. The story right now ends, Israel's in a bad time. They're in distress, and they should have served God. They should have trusted Him.